Mark and Ryan.
So I'll share the screen. So, our project was on RetroPie powered Raspberry Pi powered Retro console that could also respond to voice commands. So our goals were making a Raspberry powered handheld console that could play retro games, create attachments to the console that would allow us to control it remotely using voice command, and model the casing using 3D printing. Now, we achieved only around 2 of these 3 goals, and I'll explain further. So first, the casing we wanted to 3D print the casings and started to give it a more professional look. But the problem was neither of us was really good at CAD or 3D modeling. So we needed to learn from scratch. So since we didn't have the money to actually buy an expensive 3D printing program, and then we still needed some details and like screw holes, we decided to use a program called FreeCAD, the open source like CAD software that can be used for a lot of things. And we needed to know how to edit meshes because there was a lot of circular stuff, and there needed to be large ledges to like put in the board and stuff. But yeah, so we learned how to edit meshes. The problems began to pile up after that. So at first we thought the school had 3D printers, so that was why we made that goal. But we realized that that wasn't the case. So the first thing we were thinking about was trying to use a 3D printing company, so you can outsourcing company. But the problem was when we tried like seeing how much it would cost, it costed at least around $200. I don't think you can see it well, but it says $192.
Yes, yeah.
And like that was way too expensive for our project. Like the budget was $50, and that was not feasible. So, so one day I saw a 3D printer in the back of the classroom, and I realized it belonged to Noah Kim. So we tried to ask him for permission to use it with our own filament. The problem was the COVID stuff happened after that, and it was really not feasible for us to wait to and print everything during this time. So we have to shelve this idea. One more thing was because of the shipping delays, we had to model it before the products, before the components actually arrived, the stuff like the screen, the controllers actually arrived. And then when it came, I realized that there was a lot of tolerances for Chinese manufacturing. The stuff would actually not fit if we actually printed it. So that took another while. So in the end, we realized we couldn't do that, and we just decided to go for the arts and crafts route and decided to get some foam boards and just cut it off and use hot glue to stick them together.
Sure.
And so yeah, that was done with the casing. And for the emulation, this one was actually pretty easy. So I already had a Raspberry Pi 3, so we decided to just use that as a main logic board. We flashed it with RetroPie at first, which is like an emulation. It's a Linux-based OS emulation OS for Raspberry Pis. But then there was too many errors with our control board. So for the buttons and switches, we utilized the separate USB control board, but it didn't really play well with the RetroPie, and you'd have to initiate it every time. So I just decided to use VCoreBox instead, which is another Linux-based OS, and it actually worked fine. And yeah, this is the case. So controls, we relied on a separate USB controller board. We could have plugged it into the Raspberry Pi's GPIO and tried to program it, but then that would have been too messy because there are so many switches. And so it was better to just invest in a $2 like switchboard. Oh, but the problem was it was also Chinese, and the drivers weren't really the best. And when it came out of the box, the joystick driver, it didn't work because it was mapped incorrectly. So the X and the Y axis was swapped.
Right.
So like I have to find a new driver somewhere, and it kind of works now. So it's kind of still flaky around the diagonal path because I don't know, the driver is so weird at that. Yeah, finally, console issues, a few issues. So one, it was severely underpowered. So I didn't realize that this would take the screen would consume this much energy. So we utilized a portable battery pack for the power, but it didn't give enough amperage, so it's kind of underpowered, so it won't last very long, but it still works. Yeah, too few controls. So most game controllers has more than 5 inputs. So yeah, that was a problem. Oh, and it was an ergonomic nightmare because it was made of foam, and like you can't bend the foam. It's not gonna work, and it was so hard. It was all hard edges. And finally, yeah, no audio output. There were no speakers, and we didn't buy speakers, so you need a headphone if you want to listen to anything. Yeah, that was the issues with the console.
Okay, great.
Maybe around this point, I will share the screen. Yeah. Yes, so yeah, I'll begin presenting my portion. So my job was basically was kind of implementing the like automobile with a voice recognition. But yeah, as I would, so at first I tried to implement like language recognition. So because I can't really kind of code it from scratch, I mean, that's impossible. It's like graduate level. So what I originally planned was to import a language package, right? And kind of implement it to kind of use it. And at first I just planned to use like a simple commands such as like stop, come, go right, or go left, or move fast or move slower. So what I found after a lot of internet search, because yeah, Java didn't really have that much of a like voice recognition stuff, is I landed on Sphinx 4. So this is purely Java, and it seemed like all ideal and all seemed ready to go. So I kind of watched their tutorial and I saw through their websites and kind of attempted to use it. But the problem is it didn't quite work well because for some reason I couldn't import it properly from the GitHub. I was quite unfamiliar with it, and like when I tried to like import like files, it, I don't know, like unexpectedly like 1 or 2 files went missing, and when I did it like according to the YouTube video and it didn't work, basically I was stuck there. So I kind of switched course and I mean, since Python has like more of like a machine learning stuff, I just decided to just learn some Python and maybe kind of import like like voice recognition package from there. So I'm currently taking the course, and for this Arduino, right? So kind of implementing the motors and stuff. So I kind of followed through the guidebooks and like implemented some of those like features, like, you know, like controlling motors and like using photoresistors to detecting the distance. So that kind of worked. But the problem is I had to actually control the revolutions per minute actually to control those like motors, and I didn't quite know how to like use it for all 4 of them, because I mean there's one board and like there are like 4 motors being used at the same time, and there were some like many samples of circuits existed, but I didn't quite know how to kind of like implement it with this board. So there were some severe restraints and I'm currently figuring its way out. So the challenges, right? So for the casing, right, as Ryan mentioned before, so we couldn't actually get a 3D printer because of the lockdown. I mean, we nearly did because like Noah said, yeah, we could as long as we pay the fee for filaments, but yeah, due to lockdown, that didn't happen. And Ryan kind of made a makeshift like styrofoam. I mean, not a styrofoam, right? But just the casing. But I mean, that worked, you know, like kind of like, yeah, somehow. But the thing is like voice recognition and like controlling all those like motors for Arduino, that was a lot more difficult than I expected. So it was kind of like a pain in the butt, and yeah, the reflections.
So for my reflection, yeah, stuff doesn't work out and you're trying to use hardware. So software is much more resistant to this, but yeah, this stuff breaks, things don't actually work, things don't arrive and stuff like that. I learned that. Second, yeah, drivers for Chinese products are terrible and either sketchy or hard to find. And yeah, I went to really weird websites a lot to find these, and yeah, I don't want to do that again. finally, Raspberry Pi 3 might have been a bit underpowered for the project. I had it for a long time, but then it was kind of too weak to emulate newer consoles, so it could barely do the DS. And yeah, there's 3DS emulators coming, and I think if I redid the project, I would probably use Raspberry 4 Plus because that would actually be able to emulate that. And finally, yeah, I need to be better at soldering. So for the wirings, I had to solder an HDMI connector, and that didn't turn out well. It broke, and there's too many leads and stuff like that. So, and then I just have to buy a shorter HDMI cable and yeah, stuff like that. I think basically this told me that hardware projects need a more time than software projects generally, and you should lower your expectations when working with hardware.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also felt that, yeah, I mean, I need to study further, both in electrical engineering and computer science, because, well, I mean, I was quite confident in managing with the language, but like with regards to like placing and locating files and like in correct directions and directories, it was like a bit hard than I imagined. So like, I mean, when I like was study computer language, all I have to do is just like create a new project and like begin coding and like everything will turn out well. But when it comes to like using GitHub and stuff, well, it was quite of like a different field. And yeah, it was also because of like switching in and out of like pandemic. I mean, it was also quite difficult because yeah, I mean, I couldn't, I mean, there is like a clear difference between working everything at home and like, you know, getting to come to school and talk with people. And yeah. And for this year, yes, I'm personally taking more courses on, yeah, C and Java and Python before I go to university, because if I do it this way, well, I think I'm gonna suck a little bit. So yeah, that's the end.
Great. No, yeah, thanks again. So this actually was a perfect example of what I was talking about in terms of the fact that, again, what was important here wasn't that you necessarily have everything working, right? Because again, in real life, right? And you know, when you guys start, you know, working, you know, in technology fields, you'll discover that most projects don't work out the way you expect them to, right? You come up with schedules, you slip them massively, right? You order things from manufacturers, you know, even if it's not just like from AliExpress, and you discover that their spec sheet is just completely wrong, right? It's nothing works the way you expect it to. But again, the key thing is that, you know, so it's a great way to learn about these things, right? To kind of get to the experiments, you know, it's one thing to have somebody tell you that, oh, hardware takes a long time. It's a whole other thing to actually run into like issue after issue after issue. I think that's great. And similarly for software projects as well, right? Like Mark was referring to, you know, it's one thing when you're kind of building everything yourself from scratch, right? You can just shoot up Eclipse or whatever, start your project and just, you're good to go. But when you're trying to pull in somebody else's libraries and things like that, again, depending upon how well they've documented and organized their stuff, it can be more or less painful. Okay. Anybody have any other questions for Mark or Ryan? No? Okay, great.